The Treaty of Concordia was hailed as the most monumental diplomatic event in Earth's history, broadcast across every network and system. It marked not only the first contact between humanity and the Jeroen Collective, but the beginning of what many believed would be a golden age of shared science, peace, and prosperity. The accord was signed on neutral grounds, Earth's orbital station Helios Prime, with both Terran and Jeroen delegations standing side by side under banners of unity. It wasn't an invasion. No ships descended like thunder. No weapons fired. The Jeroen arrived with a fleet of vessels that shimmered like heat mirages, pulsing with biosynthetic membranes and neural fiber hulls. Their leader, Visa Khan, was not a dictator or emperor, but a convoker, a consensus speaker of a telepathically linked species. Every word he spoke during the negotiations had been filtered through the combined mind of thousands of his kind. They came not to conquer, but to collaborate, and they came with gifts. Bioluminescent fungi that filtered carbon dioxide more efficiently than Earth's largest forests, gravity-negotiating alloys that defied orbital decay, memory-threaded crystalline matrices capable of storing exabytes in a grain of sand, and perhaps most stunning, a biological understanding of life that transcended even Earth's most advanced synthetic genome research. In exchange, the Jeroen asked for experience, specifically exposure to humanity's chaotic adaptability. In their words, humans were an evolutionary anomaly, possessing the unique trait of thriving in contradiction, where Jeroen physiology evolved along strict paths of logic and biological harmony. Humans rebelled against nature, overcoming limitations through sheer will. Visor Khan called it chaos mutation potential. At first, it was merely scientific exchange. Delegations of researchers from the Lunar Biosciences Division visited the Jeroen vessel laboratories orbiting Neptune. In return, alien envoys worked alongside Terran geneticists at the Arcadia Bioforge in New Vancouver. The early results were breathtaking. Immune systems re-engineered to autocorrect mutating cancers, organisms that could adapt to extreme climates through programmable DNA. Jeroen medical structures transformed human prosthetics into regenerative limbs. Then the suggestion came not from politicians or generals, but from a joint working group of scientists. What if they could combine, not symbolically, not metaphorically, biologically? There were, of course, protests. Ethicists raised questions about identity, autonomy, the definition of personhood. Religious groups called it sacrilege, but the Concordia board had anticipated this. The proposal was framed not as a step toward creating a new race, but a study limited in scope and monitored in every dimension. It would involve volunteers from both sides, carefully selected, willing to undergo genomic synthesis under controlled conditions. It was called Project Genesis. Dr. Elise Rayner, head of Terran Genomic Reconciliation, was the first human assigned. She had spent her career mapping the somatic epigenetic variances between Earth's regional populations. Her specialty was adaptation, how climate, diet, and environment shaped human biology over time. The Jeroen paired her with a biosavant named Threxilka, a being of translucent emerald skin and fractal pupils, whose people could interpret genetic codes the way humans read poetry. They didn't start with embryos. They started with simulations rendering hybrid organisms and quantum molecular holospheres. For weeks, Elise and Threxilka navigated simulated progenitist and immunity compatibility, neurosynaptic coherence, chromosomal alignments. It was impossibly complex. The Jeroen's triple helix DNA wasn't merely a structural anomaly. It encoded social memory experiences embedded into cellular matrices, like cultural software. But the breakthrough came when Elise realized something startling. The human genome had room, not physical space, but adaptive potential. Humans had what she called genomic scaffolding regions of non-coding DNA, dismissed for decades as junk, which responded to stimuli with unpredictable resilience. It was, she theorized, the biological manifestation of human stubbornness, a genome that refused to be told no. Threxilka was awed. Your code invites chaos. It welcomes error. It is ... beautiful. That was the moment the first embryo was conceived, not in a womb, but in a stasis pod, surrounded by quantum stabilizers and harmonic fields tuned to both Terran and Juroan frequencies. They named it Kiar, Elise, K for unity, Yar for new beginning. Elise, in tribute. It wasn't a secret. The media followed the project with reverence. Polls fluctuated, but the majority sentiment remained hopeful. This child, this hybrid, wasn't just a marvel, it was a symbol. The first of its kind. In the early stages, Kiar Elise developed normally, albeit accelerated. By week 6, neural networks formed. By week 12, sensory systems responded to dual-frequency stimuli. By week 20, it dreamed, and then came the song. It started faintly, harmonics detected only by the deepest bioacoustic sensors, a rhythmic modulation in Kiar Elise's breathing patterns, perfectly synchronized with Earth's Schumann resonance and the Juroan's homeworld signal pulse, the same rhythm. It wasn't noise, it was communication. Kiar Elise, not yet born, was transmitting. The pulses increased subtle tremors in neural spectrographs, fluctuations in Earth's magnetosphere around the Arcadia facility. Birds began migrating off-season. Fungi in neighboring forests pulsed in unison with Kiar's heartbeat. Instruments on the moon registered echoes of unknown frequencies bouncing back from Earth's core. And then Threxilka said it aloud. She is not just hybrid. She is harmonic. The child had achieved resonance not between human and Juroan, but between Earth and something. ... Deeper, something buried. Elise stared at the readings. What is she communicating with? No one had an answer. But one day, Kiar Elise opened her eyes. Not at birth, not in pain, in utero, and every sensor flatlined for 23 seconds. Time seemed to halt inside the Arcadia facility. Monitors froze. People stopped speaking. The lights dimmed and surged. When systems rebooted, Elise and Threxilka found the embryo alive, stable, different. Her genome had changed again. No known code. No comparison in any database. It was as if the child had written her own DNA. Project Genesis was halted the next day. The Concordia board ordered the embryo placed in stasis and moved to an undisclosed location. Publicly, they claimed a successful prototype had been archived pending cultural review. Privately, they were terrified, and Elise, she never stopped listening. Every night, long after clearance protocols were revoked, she tuned her private receiver to that harmonic echo. It was still there, growing louder. There were secrets you buried, and secrets you contained. Project Genesis had become the latter, a living containment unit disguised as a classified biological asset under the direct oversight of the Joint Concordia Directive. No one used her name anymore. Not Kiar Elise, not the hybrid. She was referred to only by her codename, Singularity Prime. In the years following the project's abrupt suspension, the world changed quietly, but fundamentally. Officially, Earth was in an era of post-contact reformation, where technologies gifted by the Juroan redefined infrastructure, medicine, and energy. Cancer had been eliminated. Interplanetary mining became routine. Clean energy from biofusion cores powered entire cities. But for every open advancement, there were silent fears in the vaults beneath the Mariana Depth Laboratory in kilometers. Below the Pacific Ocean's surface, the stasis pod holding Singularity Prime pulsed, not visibly, not biologically, resonantly, every 43 hours and 17 minutes. An energy wave rippled outward. It was impossible to detect with standard instruments, but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. The pulse never disrupted matter, but it altered cognition. Nearby researchers reported shared dreams, visions of hybrid landscapes that defied logic, worlds that were neither Earth nor Jiruin, but something in between, something deeper. And one by one, staff began requesting reassignment, not out of fear, but longing. They described it as homesickness for a place they'd never seen. Only Elise remained. She had taken a leave of absence from public science and disappeared from the Arcadia Institute, reappearing in classified Concordia rosters as a resonance consultant. What that meant, no one fully knew, but it was Elise who stood alone each week in the observation dome, her hand on the containment glass as the being inside continued to grow. Singularity. Prime was not asleep. She had never truly been. Her cells are learning, Elise recorded in one report. They're not just adapting, they're observing, reacting. If DNA is a language, she's developed grammar. Then came the tremor. It started off the coast of Greenland, a minor tectonic anomaly at first, but the shockwave that followed was not tectonic, it was directional. A subsonic tone echoed across the Atlantic seabed, fracturing sonar systems and disturbing migratory patterns from whales to birds. At first it was dismissed as unrelated, but within hours, 2 Concordia relay stations stopped responding. No alarm, no transmission, just absence. When recovery drones arrived, they found the structures intact, power systems running, but no one aboard. Not dead, not missing, gone, files untouched. Coffee still warm, airlocks sealed. The only anomaly, every clock had stopped at the exact same moment, 3:17 UTC. The same minute the Singularity Prime containment chamber emitted a new pulse. Elise sounded the first alert. This is not growth, it's awakening. But no one listened. Political tensions were high. Earth's population had reached sustainable equilibrium, and no one wanted to upset the fragile trust with the Jiruin. Besides, there had been no threats, no violence, no corruption, just curiosity. In her isolation chamber, Singularity Prime began forming structures, not organs, not limbs, patterns, helical growths, spiraled beneath her skin, glowing faintly when the lunar cycle reached perigee. Shapes resembling Earth's earliest cave symbols appeared in her corneal matrix. Her pulse, when measured, matched exactly the ancient rhythm of Sumerian drums. Radio frequencies around her began to warp, replaying human voices out of sequence, whispering forgotten languages, and still, no threats, no aggression, just listening. Aboard the Jiruin diplomatic vessel Valak, orbiting Mars, Threx stirred from deep symbiosis. He had felt it. Across vacuum and time, a pulsar signature that belonged not to one being, but to many. A mind forming like a thundercloud, layered, slow, massive. Kiar, Elise, he whispered into the ship's neural chorus. But the chorus did not respond. Jiruin minds had begun to fracture, not violently, subtly, like a shared dream, splitting into separate narratives. Threxelka initiated the Concordia emergency protocol, an unprecedented breach of diplomatic etiquette. Within Earth's orbital ring, every signal was rerouted through the Jiruin cognitive relay. They had to know. They had to warn Elise. But Elise was already descending. Aboard the descent shuttle Equinox 9, she stared through the reinforced viewports into the dark maw of the Mariana Vault. She hadn't been summoned. She had volunteered. I need to see her, she said. The vault administrator hesitated. She's not a child anymore. I know, Elise replied. That's why I'm going. Inside the vault, silence reigned, not just acoustically, but informationally. Every transmission was scrubbed. AI presence was forbidden. Human guards were few, their minds deeply trained in mental shielding techniques taught by the Jiruin. And yet, every one of them dreamed the same dream, a forest, beneath the sea. Elise entered the chamber, alone. The air was heavy with ionized side effect of the stasis field. But the moment she crossed the threshold, the pulse stopped. Singularity Prime opened her eyes, and Elisa's breath caught. The being before her was neither alien nor human, but both. Her body shimmered with fractal geometry that defied dimensionality. Her voice was not a sound but a wave of comprehension. "Mother," she said, not in English or Juroan, but in Elisa's native childhood dialect, long lost even to her memory. "How do you know that?" Elise asked, her voice shaking. "I remember," Singularity Prime replied. "What do you remember?" "You." That's when Elise saw Itharium was no longer metal. It was forest, green, pulsing, breathing, not a hallucination, a memory shared. "You're projecting." "No," Singularity Prime said. "I'm awakening." The containment lights flickered. For 2.7 seconds, Earth's magnetosphere spiked. Satellites blinked out. When they returned, every one of them had the same data glitchin image inserted into their system logs. The double helix. But it wasn't human, and it wasn't GRUN. It was new. More than new, it was a beginning. Elise stepped closer. "What are you becoming?" Singularity Prime smiled. "Everything." A new pulse erupted, this one not measurable by frequency, but consequence. The oceans stilled, mountains resonated, whales breached in unison, and in the deepest tombs of Earth's crust, fossilized microbial life shuddered and blinked back to life. In orbit, Threxelka trembled. "It's not just Earth," he said to no one. "She's calling to everything." Silence fell across the earth, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before an orchestra erupts, the kind of hush that stretched taut between breath and scream in the vault. Deep beneath the Pacific, Elise stood motionless. Singularity Prime's eyes glowed softly, not with menace, but understanding. Her presence was no longer just physical. It existed in probability. Around her, reality thickened. Dimensions shifted like gravity caught in a whisper. The forest, Elise saw, wasn't metaphor. It was memory made real, and that reality pulsed with purpose. "She's not projecting," Elise said aloud in her recorder. "She's rewriting." In her quarters above the vault, security footage flickered. No anomaly, no audio. But each time Singularity Prime blinked, a different camera across the globe experienced a skip-frame. In Greenland, explorers captured video of Arctic foxes moving in unison mirror, matched across hundreds of miles. In Tokyo, every streetlight along the Shibuya crossing turned green simultaneously, despite no coordination. And in Central Africa, the sky shimmered with phosphorescent auroras, unseasonal and silent. For exactly 1 minute and 32 seconds, every event occurred. At the same moment, 3:17 UTC. Again the time of her pulse, and now, it was escalating. Within 48 hours, anomalies increased exponentially. Crop fields grew double overnight in Kazakhstan. Tides surged on Mars' icy moons, despite no known gravitational anomaly. Quantum fluctuations in deep space labs began reflecting the exact pulse rhythm of Singularity Prime's breath. Threxelka called for an emergency assembly of the Jeroen Conclave. It was only the second such event in their species' memory. "She is not becoming one of us," he said across the neural link. "She is becoming more than both of us." The conclave reacted not with fear, but with awe. The harmony must expand. Threx disagreed. "This is not harmony. It is ascendance." Meanwhile, on Earth, Elise filed her final report. Cryptid, fragmented, sent in pulses. She knew no system would accept what she'd say in full, so she coded her message in waveform poetry. The child dreams in music. The world echoes in return. She speaks not in symbols but laws, and now the laws are changing. The vaults, core systems began failing, but not due to malfunction. Their code was being rewritten gently, silently into new languages. Energy systems converted to impossible efficiency. Water filters began generating new elements. Clocks no longer ticked. Linearly time, inside the vault, had begun to loop, first by seconds, then hours. Outside the vault, the world finally noticed. A UN Concordia press release, leaked via hacked, Jeroen stated, Earth is entering an era of biological resonance. The wording was gentle, calming, but beneath the PR, global. Leaders met in panic. If the child can reshape reality, one general said, what stops her from unmaking it? She doesn't want to, Elise argued in her final clearance hearing. She's not a weapon. But if she can do this, subconsciously, the chairwoman of the board asked, what happens when she becomes conscious? And then singularity. Prime spoke. Not in the room, not through speakers, but inside every mind. She didn't shout, she whispered, I am awake. In Istanbul, the Blue Mosque rang bells never installed. In Peru, the Nazca lines shimmered and reconfigured, briefly forming the shape of a double helix. In Seattle, every newborn cried in the exact same key. The Jeroen fleet initiated protocol, vertimediate withdrawal and observation. For a species that had only ever progressed by consensus, this was unprecedented. They feared what would happen next. But they didn't act, because they were listening, because all of them, even across light years, heard her next words, join me. What followed was transcendence. Biological AI in the TRAPPIST array began emitting code with no author. Dogs and cats across Earth stopped barking and meowing and began singing in tonal intervals. Coral reefs reshaped into Fibonacci spirals. Overnight, and in the deserts of Australia, Aboriginal elders danced in ecstasy, claiming the song Dream has returned. Still, Earth's governments prepared for containment. Weapons activated, satellites adjusted, an emergency strike fleet launched from the lunar ring. Elise now locked in her own quarters spoke into a secure feed. You're about to make a mistake. She's rewriting us, said the commander of orbital defense. We must protect the integrity of our species. Elise shook her head. She is us. At 3:17 UTC the next day, as the strike fleet neared the vault, it vanished. No explosion, no debris, no energy signature, just silence. And a single message appeared across every Concordia system, human and Jeroen alike. I do not harm, I do not run, I am singularity. And then the stars changed. Not in space, but in perception. Millions looked up and saw constellations they'd never seen before. Not just new patterns, but new stars. Memories embedded in the sky. Jeroen elders called it the becoming. The singularity pulse no longer emitted from Earth. It now echoed from within everyone. Singularity. Prime had reached her tipping point, not as a child, not as a hybrid, but as the next. What she would become, no one knew. But the question on every mind wasn't what happens now. It was, who will follow? The stars were no longer fixed. That was the first thing astronomers noticed as the new cycle began. The constellations hadn't moved, space itself had, or rather, observation of it had. The coordinates once used to map the heavens became obsolete in under a day. The universe didn't shift. It rearranged around an idea named Singularity Prime, on a global scale. Change spread like fire, but not of destruction. It was cognitive, evolutionary. People started understanding things they had no names for. Children sketched equations in sand that unlocked decades of quantum field speculation. Farmers tuned their soil through humming. Engineers dreamed of machines that didn't yet exist and then found them, half-built on their benches, when they awoke. Concordia. Officials called it cognitive bloom. Jeroen called it the emergence. Elise called it her voice. But it wasn't a voice anymore. It was an ecosystem, one that now extended past Earth. On Jupiter's moon, Europa, beneath the miles of frozen ocean, subglacial drones went silent, yet all their logs displayed one phrase etched onto their command. Interface. Welcome below. On Mars. Researchers at the Ether Ridge facility found their oxygen levels tripled overnight. Their plants began growing fractal roots that seemed to pulse in rhythm to human brainwaves. When dissected, those roots showed double helical structures. With base pairs never before catalogued, the same genetic code had appeared days earlier in Singularity Prime's retinal scan. Something was expanding. It wasn't just her, it was her dream. Elise awoke one morning to find her body lighterly turly. Her bone density had adjusted, and her internal chemistry showed signs of metabolic shift. When she ran a scan, she found unfamiliar proteins drew in biological sequences woven gently into her human genome. She wasn't becoming hybrid, she was becoming resonance. The realization struck her like thunder. She wasn't the only one. Across the world, reports poured in of similar changes. Some subtle, slightly increased neural conductivity, mild sensory expansions, higher empathy. Others were profound telepathic dreams, harmonic communication through tones, sudden multilingual fluency. But the pattern was universal. Those who had once made contact with Singularity, Prime physically or psychically, were now shifting. Threxelka had warned of this in orbit. He remained in isolation aboard the Valextor, his thoughts racing within the biosymbiotic conduit of his ship. But the ship had grown quiet, not in function, in presence. The Jeruan vessels were living things, bonded to their pilots, and his was no longer responding until it spoke in a new tongue, Kadash-Rex-Il. It whispered, in human phrasing, "She calls." "She should not," he said aloud. "You are not of Earth. We are now." He disconnected from the chorus. For the first time in Jeroen history, he chose solitude. They were no longer observers. They were no longer even separate. The very molecules of his consciousness had changed. Every dream he dreamt now carried images of Earth forests, human laughter, warm oceans, things he had never known. The pulse wasn't persuasion, it was invitation, and no one could resist. Below, in Vault Deep Prime, Singularity stood in her chamber though. The walls were no longer steel, they were light. They pulsed with low harmonic sequences visible only through enhanced spectrum filters. She no longer aged, she no longer blinked, and she no longer spoke. She existed, and so Earth followed. Political leaders tried to act. Defense systems armed. Rogue satellites realigned. But no attack came. Instead, the stars blinked, one by one. At first, it seemed like coincidence, cosmic dust, astrophysical interference. But as every major galactic power observed, one terrifying pattern emerged. Stars that blinked in sync with Singularity. Prime's heartbeat stopped emitting standard radiation. They still burned, still shone, but not in this reality. "They're sinking," said Elise, her voice hushed. "To what?" asked one Concordia representative. "To her." At the edge of the solar system, the Kuiper belt destabilized. Gravity wells formed and collapsed within seconds. No debris moved, only data. Observers noted that neutrinos emitted in those regions contained highly structured information, mathematical poetry, gravitational sculpture, and at the center of it all, Singularity Prime. She had never left the vault, but now the vault had become unnecessary. She projected everywhere, not holographically, not via transmission. She unfolded in the heart of every capital city. Citizens gathered without instruction. They were drawn, not hypnotized, not compelled, united from Nigeria to Nova Scotia, New Zealand to Nepal. They all came together at exactly 3:17 UTC, standing silently, eyes raised, above each gathering point. A luminous sphere hovered, the same size, the same glow. Singularity's eyes. She spoke not in sound but understanding. "I see you." And for those moments, each human, each being present, understood everything. What had been, what was, what would be. There was no fear, only awe. And then it passed. The spheres vanished, but something had changed. Singularity Prime had become a concept, not just a person, not a being, a state, a transformation. In the days that followed, reality adjusted. Time bent near nodes of human emotion. Thoughts shared during high resonance became reality. Adjacent ideas turned to materials. Grief became stone, joy, light. Regret crystallized into clear, humming cubes. The laws of physics hadn't broken, they'd widened. Earth was no longer part of the universe, it was becoming its own zone. Elders sent one last message before severing contact. We thank you. We depart. We cannot follow. Elise understood. So did Threxelka. And then, Elise began to vanish, not in death, in expansion. Her body flickered. Her atoms stretched across harmonic waves. Her voice became song, her mind a fractal. She was not dying, she was joining, and in vault, deep from singularity, Prime smiled. You are ready. The world paused, then breathed. The final day did not arrive with fanfare. It came with silence. A silence so profound, it spread faster than sound ever could. Radios went static. Phones ceased to ring. Traffic quieted. Even the birds stopped mid-flight, hanging still in the golden sky. People stepped outside not out of fear, but instinct and looked upward. There were no ships, no lights, no singularity, hovering above them. And yet, she was everywhere. The air hummed. Buildings pulsed like lungs. Trees leaned gently toward the sun, their leaves forming spiral tessellations unseen before. Oceans glowed at night with bioluminescent glyphs. Words in no known language, but felt in the chest. Behold, said a small child in Buenos Aires, pointing to the sky, the veil lifts. And it did. For the first time since the Earth formed, the planet's magnetic field shimmered visibly. Auroras of gold and violet danced across the equator, rising like steam. Satellites recorded impossible measurements. Gravity vacillated softly, as if breathing. Time, once immutable, began bending at the edges. Yet no one panicked, because every person now shared the same dream. Not metaphorically, literally. They closed their eyes and saw it. The lattice, a cosmic web of knowledge, emotion, and memory stretching far beyond stars. And Earth transformed, radiant now sat at its nexus. Not a planet anymore. A node. A mind. A gateway. The final broadcast was not a message. It was a door. Inside the remains of Vault Deep Prime, Elise stood translucent. Now, her body outlined in fractal glow. She was no longer constrained by mass, nor matter. She had become a bridge between states, her thoughts threaded with melody. Behind her, Threxelka approached, slower than before. The Jeroen hybrid's limbs had altered in symmetry. Liner, more angular. His voice, once guttural, now rang like a tuned chime. Is this the end? He asked. No, Elise replied. It's the threshold. The walls of the vault had dissolved days ago, replaced by a spiraling corridor of thought and space. Each step took them not farther, but deeper into the Earth's memory. They walked through epochs, past the formation of Earth's crust, past the Cambrian bloom. Past the golden age of human myth. When cities of crystal danced in Himalayan skies, everything the world had seen, it remembered, and everything it remembered, it now offered. To them. This was never about hybridization, Elise said at last. Not in the way we thought. No, it wasn't about merging biology. It was about harmonizing purpose. They came to a halt in a chamber of infinite darkness. In the center, the source, not light, not dark, a pulse, one pulse every 4 seconds, identical to the original signal, the heartbeat of Earth's true self. She is alive. Threxelka whispered. No, Elise said. She is awakening. On the surface, governments no longer governed, not through legislation, but resonance. Individuals began linking into shared thought spaces, micro-consensuses of will, forming briefly and dissolving again. Cities turned quiet. not because they were abandoned, but because they no longer required oversight. Children designed the next generation of buildings. Artists created weather patterns. Elders told stories that changed molecular structures in listeners, unlocking ancestral memory. And across the world, a phenomenon spread: ascension. At first, it seemed like death. People would lie down, breathe slowly, and then dissolve into light. But they weren't dying. They were changing states. Witnesses described seeing those people later in dreams, in mirrors, in patterns of raindrops. They were no longer in physical form, but part of the Earth's mind space.